Hello everyone and welcome to today's web seminar on Select Crowd Review. My name is Sue Hodgson and I'm responsible for TEMA Chemistry. For those of you not familiar with us, TEMA is a leading supplier of information and services contributing to the improvement of healthcare and health. Employing more than 1,000 staff, we're a family-owned company developing products and services in digital and other media for medical and chemistry markets since 1886. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. Please note that this web seminar is being recorded. A link to the recording will be sent to all registrants shortly after the seminar via email. The link will expire after 2 weeks. The audience will be kept on mute during the entire web seminar. At any time, you can submit your questions to our panel. To do so, please type your questions into the chat window on the right. Please note that unless you choose the anonymous option, your name will be visible to panelists and it may be mentioned. My colleague, Dr. Daniel Schiff, will be on hand as chat manager and will help in choosing questions for the panel. Please look out for the free content that we will post in the chat window during the course of the web seminar. And finally, please tweet using the hashtag #SelectCrowdReview. We're in the process of rolling Select Crowd Review out across TEMA's science portfolio, and I'd like to highlight the journals currently offering this technology. They are SynOpen and SynLet from the chemistry business, ROFO, the International Journal of Sports Medicine, and the Journal of Applied Clinical Informatics from our medicine business. Emerald publishers are also using Select Crowd Review, and the journals involved are Islamic Accounting and Business Research, and Sustainability in Higher Education. Emerging Markets Case Studies, which is not pictured, is also using Select Crowd Review. I'd now like to introduce today's speakers. First of all, Professor Benjamin List. Ben's research focuses on chemical synthesis and catalysis. Hi Ben, nice to see you. He is director at the He's director at the Max Planck Institute for Kulturforschung in Germany and editor-in-chief of the journal Synlet. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Maël Frize is co-founder and chief product officer at FileStage. FileStage is the enterprise-ready online proofing software that helps teams to get their work reviewed and approved faster. Welcome, Maël.
Thanks a lot.
It's great to have you both with us today. So developing solutions begins by understanding the problem. So we went out to our author community to ask them about the challenges of traditional peer review, and we're going to show you now what they told us.
Traditional peer review has some flaws. It can be quite lengthy. Reviewers may send you differing comments and you then have to try and respond in a way that can progress the manuscript through peer review despite those. Reviews could be biased if you have 2 or 3 reviewers and one is slightly outside the area. Timescales can be quite lengthy, particularly if reviewers aren't responding to a manuscript and you have to approach several reviewers to try and get that manuscript out to peer review as an editor.
Unfortunately, the way we do peer reviewing today at many scientific journals can run into the situation that completely contradictory referee reports are obtained. One saying, for example, this is beautiful, publish after minor revision, and the other one saying, this is horrible, reject. How to react to this as an author or as an editor? An editor invited 2 highly qualified referees to judge a manuscript and now has these completely contradictory opinions. Who should he give more heed to? This often leads to the need for additional referee reports, long refereeing processes that at the end seem arbitrary to the authors and leave authors and editors frustrated.
So how should we respond to feedback like this? I'm now going to pass over to Ben List, who will talk to us about how the concept of Select Crowd Review was born.
Yes, sure. Thank you so much, Sue. It's my privilege to be here, and I would also like to thank everybody else who's out here and is ready to discuss with us. Yeah, thank you very much again for everybody for being here and discussing with us a new form of peer review. crowd reviewing. And I would like to say upfront that I'm not opposed to peer review. Rather, to the contrary, actually, we're going to discuss a form of peer review that I would argue is just a better form of peer review. And as it turns out, there is a whole scientific discipline of peer reviewing, and people in this area discuss on their conferences, like, how old is peer review? And there's apparently a discussion, I'm not an expert, but there's apparently a discussion whether or not it's 200 years old or 500 years old. In any case, it is a very old methodology, and it has its flaws, as was pointed out in the video just shown. I would sort of estimate that in about 80% or so of the cases, it works just fine, at least from my personal experience with our research. Even when my manuscript is not accepted, there can be acceptable peer review feedback. However, the thing is that sort of drove us in thinking about how can we advance peer review is that it is so old, and that it was designed several hundred years ago, when technology, essentially the technology that was available for communication, was, as shown here, basically a stagecoach. So you could write a letter and then invite somebody that you deemed is an expert in the area, and then wait a few months or years until you finally get some feedback. And I think at the time it was probably the best technology one could use for such an endeavor, but times have changed so dramatically. And this is how we nowadays communicate. We all have basically the world knowledge in the palm of our hands, and we can instantaneously connect with any other scientist on the planet and discuss content and discuss science. And I think this is so incredible. In fact, I think it's just the tip of the iceberg of what is going to happen in the future. And I think it's nothing less but truly revolutionary. And so our thinking was, imagine you had to design a method with which manuscripts can be evaluated by a peer group using today's technology, not being limited by what has been happening in the past, but using today's technology. And we were particularly keen on advancing peer review using sort of these qualitatively advanced technologies that really came out and that are only possible with this modern technology of the internet, which in the past you could forget about with for example, a stagecoach having something like instant messaging, trying to connect with other people on the world would be a very slow endeavor. But nowadays, with tools like WhatsApp and similar instant messaging tools, you can connect to pretty much anybody on the world right away, right now. And similarly, there's these elements of connecting everybody and having crowd intelligence, using the minds of so many people on the world simultaneously to create content. For example, on Wikipedia, where we use crowd intelligence, or where people use crowd intelligence to create really significant and meaningful articles. And I'm always happy if I find an article on Wikipedia, because I can somehow, I feel like I can trust this content. Similarly, there's crowdfunding, where somebody has a great idea but no money, and then he asks just many people to help him with this idea, and then create a wealth with which he can fulfill his dreams. And also these amazing tools like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. What is this symbol here called? And there's these blogs and forums where people happily discuss ideas. It's kind of a new form of getting new information. Before we had TV and maybe newspapers, and now everybody can put out an opinion and discuss it. I think this is very, very fascinating. And so our idea was, use these elements in a productive way and use the successful modern aspects of the internet, such as multiple authorship, social media, instant messaging, crowd intelligence, not shown here. Use this energy of the communities to write their opinions out in blogs and forums, to really improve peer reviewing, to design a new form of peer reviewing, which we call crowd reviewing, or intelligent crowd reviewing, or now I think we call it select crowd reviewing. And after a lot of discussions and intense deliberations with friends and colleagues and my co-workers in the laboratory, we came up with this idea, and it's actually a simple idea, but I can assure you it's not, you know, born out of a moment. Let's just put the manuscript online and see what happens. We really thought about it. And our idea was to significantly increase the number of referees. So not have, you know, this may sound challenging to those of you who are editors and trying, you know, desperately to find referees, and then allow these increased number of referees to interact with each other. That was sort of the basic idea. And in more specifically, what we wanted to do was basically 4 steps. In fact, it's less, but the first step is to somehow recruit a crowd of well-trained experts in the area of our research, which is chemical synthesis and catalysis. And we wanted to use people from industry, in chemistry, of course, many people also work in industry, from academia, more advanced senior colleagues, but also younger colleagues, assistant professors, and even postdocs. That's kind of a novelty to some degree to do this like openly. I know that other journals are also doing it, but we would really do this openly. You know, really great postdocs who have published awesome papers and work in good laboratories, to include them in this crowd. Second step is then to create an online platform where now manuscripts can be uploaded and this crowd can discuss together the content of these manuscripts. And after an intense discussion, which we hoped would lead to a sort of a consensus kind of vibe, so to say, and then we could use this to make you know, an editorial decision which is fair and really kind of comprehensive. So that was the idea. And it turns out at the time there was the marketing manager of Thieme, Julia Stötzner, and she realized, well, I think there is a startup company in Stuttgart who's doing something similar coming out of an advertisement business, and that was FileStage. And they had created this super nice platform where advertisers basically can look at photography for an advertisement, and then the photographer who might be in Hong Kong and the art director in New York City and maybe the customer in Mülheim an der Ruhr can easily discuss collaboratively this picture. And she realized the analogy, and so we asked FileStage if they could help us in an initial experiment, if this can be advanced to peer reviewing. And indeed, they were excited to share their technology with us. And this is basically how it works. Our referees, the crowd, will receive an email. And in this email, you have a few links to manuscripts, depending on how many manuscripts will have to be reviewed. In this case, it's 3 manuscripts. And then our referees can just click on, if they are interested in the title, I have tried to cross this out here, or in the authors, they can click on this link. And what will happen is the manuscript will appear in form of a PDF that you can see here in the middle. And on the right, you can see sort of in small symbols, all the different pages of this manuscript. And if you have now different ways how to comment on this manuscript, you can either click on a plus up here and then have a general comment like, this manuscript is interesting because the authors have discovered a new method that can solve this or that problem. Or if you want to be more specific, you can address an individual aspect of the manuscript. For example, in this table, you want to comment on entry 3. So you click here, a blue dot appears. And then on the left side, you can now make your specific remarks to this entry in the table. And what is special about this, of course, everything is anonymous. So the referees don't know who their identities. In this case, it's maybe, I don't know, it looks like 10 referees. And they have these nice looking symbols here, which are specific for each individual referee. And they also have a code name, which consists of letters and numbers. And you can then see all the comments by everybody else. So I write a general comment, let's say here, and then somebody else reads it and can comment to my comment. And that is a very important aspect of crowd reviewing, because if somebody makes a mistake, if somebody is biased or really doesn't know much about this and says something wrong, it will be immediately corrected by the rest of the crowd. And that's a very powerful tool in our experience. And so with this early experimenting, we had maybe 16 papers or so that we evaluated like this in the first few months. Actually, overall, we had maybe 70 manuscripts in a total of 2 years in these early days. I decided, you can already see, we didn't really know how many people should be in the crowd. How long should we make the PDF of the manuscript available? We experimented a little bit, and it was a bit overwhelming in the early days. For example, the first manuscript get 147, I think, if I see it correctly, comments. And then in parentheses, you can see also comments to a comment, sort of as an indicator how much of a discussion was ongoing. So that was a bit overwhelming also for our authors. And we're now, of course, much more concise and more efficient in getting really a quantitative or semi-quantitative feedback in a reasonable amount of time. Anyway, I wrote this piece now, this opinion or worldview piece for Nature, in which I concluded that crowd-based peer review can be good and fast. And I went even as far as in the last sentence of this paper to state that crowd reviewing works. And there was an intense discussion that followed after that, kind of fortunately, and I really enjoyed seeing all these different criticism and discussions and opinion out there on social media, on Twitter, and so on. And it was a bit, I guess, rightfully so criticized that I concluded after evaluating 16 manuscripts that crowd reviewing works. But I was optimistic, and I think I was rightfully optimistic, because subsequently at SYNLAB, our chemical synthesis and catalysis-based journal, we have made this now the default tool to evaluate scientific manuscripts. And as you can see, it has grown massively subsequently. Of course, it's a free country. Our authors do not have to use crowd reviewing if they have any problems with it. They can, of course, decide to go for traditional peer reviewing. But as you can see now, more and more people joyfully pick crowd reviewing. Actually, recently, Maël van Gemmeren and I, Maël is our crowd reviewing editor, have published a paper in our home journal in SYNLAB. I know it's a chemical synthesis journal, but it's you can access this. All of you can access this manuscript, and we have designed this paper a little bit in describing how crowd review works, and then I have collected many questions that came from authors and other editors and friends and colleagues, and tried to answer them there. So you will see that there are many questions that may be arising in you right now are already answered in this paper, which I recommend for you to read. Again, the discussion is kind of intense. This is a more recent content that appeared on a website that's called the Scholarly Kitchen, a very nice and very deep website discussing science and how to publish, where one of the founders of FileSage, Nicholas Dawn, gave an interview. And you can see also in the discussion, people have thoughts about this, and there's an intense discussion going on there. And I've also written some statements here. So to summarize what I was just telling you, crowd reviewing is really fast. Please remember this. We get substantive feedback in just a couple of days normally. So typically after 2 days, we have more than enough feedback to make a really good decision. It is also more or less comprehensive. So what you normally get, and I forgot to mention this, we did the control experiment, so to speak, and conducted regular peer review. And the information you get from normal peer review, you will definitely get in a much shorter time using crowd reviewing. It is fair because if somebody has an extreme opinion, either because he's the personal enemy or the personal friend of the author, then there are 69 or 70 or 80 other people that will immediately step in and correct these strong and maybe wrong opinions. Furthermore, I would argue it improves the papers that ultimately come out. And that is really important because this is really a tool to improve science, I would suggest to you here. And there are a few other aspects that are important. It improves the quality of manuscripts. If you do an internal crowd reviewing with your laboratory, it trains the next generation of scientists. And I think it is also suitable for other scientific evaluation efforts, for example, for funding organizations. And with that, let me thank everybody who was involved, the key players, Maël van Gemmeren, who was a graduate student here and is now our crowd editor at SYNLAB. Philippa is doing the same job for SynOpen. I'd also like to thank David Diaz. He's my current SYNLAB assistant manager, Katrin Ulbrich. She's the crowd reviewing expert at Thieme. Maël will speak in just a few minutes. Julia, I already mentioned, the marketing manager at Thieme. I would also like to thank previous assistants, editorial assistants in my group, in my office, Dennis Höfler and Francesca Mandrelli, and Alexander Kaltsidis, my kind assistant. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank everybody at Thieme, Sue, of course, for organizing this and for being so open and so excited about this, like we all are, Susanne Haag, Steffi Baumann, and many, many others whose name I have probably forgotten. So thank you again for joining us tonight, and I will hand over the stage now to Maël Frize, and he will tell you a little bit how crowd reviewing works on the IT side of things. So thank you.
Thanks a lot. So let me share my screen. Hello, everyone. My name is Maël. I'm one of the co-founders at Frize, and we are the software solution behind Crowd Review. And in my short little presentation, I will walk you through how we got involved in this very exciting project, how the user experience actually looks like on the platform, and what plans we do have for the future. First of all, let me give you a little bit of background information on FileStage. FileStage is the leading online proofing software for companies and brands. So our purpose is to help busy teams to streamline the feedback and approval of their work. So on a daily basis, FileStage is being used to review marketing material, websites, press releases, architecture, drawings, product magazines, and obviously also scientific papers. FileStage is a startup and was founded 2015 in Stuttgart, Germany. And since 2018, this is something you can see here on the map. We are a fully remote company with team members spread all across the globe. So we have team members in Canada, Colombia, all over Europe, but also in Pakistan, India, and Indonesia. So also pre-COVID, we've embraced distributed working and remote working. So our journey in the STM market started back in 2016 when Ben List and his team approached us and asked us, what if you could help us to make peer review more efficient? So obviously this was a big question mark for us, but we became very curious. So we believe that true innovation comes from questioning the status quo and thinking differently. So that's what got us really excited at that moment. And we started researching and talking to people to learn more about this problem. So what are we trying to solve here? And pretty quickly, we understood that in the process of submitting a paper, there's a critical step called peer review. And typically, this can cause 3 types of headache. First of all, it is a slow process. So it takes long to get paper reviewed. And this is not good, obviously, because you can lose a competitive edge. Also, there's a risk of bias because the quality of the reviews depends on a very small number of reviewers who might be biased. And also, it means a high workload for reviewers because reviewers have to invest a lot of time to review than traditional peer review. So this is how Ben's idea was born, to try out a new efficient method to organize peer review. And the basic idea is very simple. You send a file to a selected crowd of qualified experts who collaboratively review the paper. So it's like a closed group, it's not the public, and it's experts. And how does it work? Like, how did we put it into practice? So you share a file with a group of experts, and they review and comment the manuscript anonymously. And that's very important. They collaborate, they interact with each other, and they discuss different points of view together. So we said, okay, Ben, this sounds very exciting. Let's try it out. And Ben and his team ran experiments to learn how crowd review compares to traditional peer review and how the outcome of the reviews were affected. And to be honest, for us, this was also an experiment, and the results were quite astonishing and promising. Manuscript could be reviewed very quickly within 72 hours, and the feedback we received was surprisingly overwhelming. So one chemistry lecturer here from the UK, for example, wrote, one advantage of the crowd is that it helps deter unfair reviews, which can occasionally happen in traditional peer review. Also, there was a lot of coverage in the press, including the publication Nature that Ben mentioned. And here also comes a quote from Chemistry World, the comments and discussions were of sufficient quality to allow the journal's editors to make editorial decisions in a fraction of the time it normally takes to organize peer review. So obviously this was also very exciting for us, and we saw that there's a need and a problem we can solve. To sum things up, what we learned is that select crowd review can bring advantages to the review process. First of all, it's faster, so manuscripts are reviewed within days and not within months. It can have a higher quality and less bias because the crowd intelligence rules out bias, and it puts less workload on reviewers because the work is distributed on many shoulders, on many different shoulders, and not only on 2 or 3. So now, how does the user experience look like? What is the product like actually? So you simply open FileStage in your browser, so on any device. No installation is needed, no download is needed. You can just drag and drop and upload your files. The two key features here are no download and installation required. It works on any device, also on your mobile phone. And this is also a very important part. You don't send unencrypted emails back and forth with open PDFs. Everything happens on an encrypted platform with data centers in Europe and Frankfurt, which comply to data privacy regulations like GDPR. So it's also an improvement in terms of data privacy and data security comparing to traditional peer review. So when you open a paper, how does it look like? It's basically like an Adobe. You just see the PDF and can start commenting right away. You can highlight text to give very precise feedback. So if you like one sentence that you want to highlight, you can give very precise feedback. On the right side, you can see that you can also add annotations, so little drawings in case you have any diagram you want to comment on. So it's easy to annotate and to give visual feedback. And on the left side, you can see the comments. There are two important aspects here. First of all, the reviewers are anonymized to reduce the risk of bias and to have a very open discussion. And also what you can see here is how reviewers can react to each other and can create comments and replies based on existing comment. So you have some interaction going on and you don't need to consolidate two different types of reviews, but this will all happen automatically within one document. So here are a summary of the key features. One thing worth mentioning as well here is that everything happens in real time. So when a reviewer in Texas creates a comment, 1 second later it will appear for the reviewer in Russia or India or wherever. So everything happens in real time and you can really interact in real time. The last feature I want to highlight is the review report that you can export at the end of the review once the review is completed. It contains all the comments by all the reviewers. And what's helpful about that is that you can feed them into your manuscript submission system. So you can import it there and forward it to your editors-in-chief, or also your author. So everything is consolidated in the end within one platform. So the way we see our role here in this project as a technology partner is that we translate the market needs and the pain points into a technical solution. So we listen to your feedback, we trust the domain experts. We're not the ones telling you how to review documents. You tell us and we make it happen. So based on the feedback we received so far, we already came up with a lot of helpful improvements on the platform. For example, the anonymous reviews, the real-time collaboration, searching inside documents, and also having these very precise annotations. But to be honest, we scratched only the surface of what's possible. There are many ideas we're currently taking into consideration. For example, integrating seamlessly with the manuscript submission system to have a very seamless exchange of data. Also, there's the idea to easily recruit your expert crowd reviewers based on the platform or inside the platform, or also to gather analytics on reviews, manuscripts, and journals to make better review decisions. Another idea is to provide checklists for reviewers to further improve the quality of the feedback. So if you have a very precise checklist on what to check, how to check, maybe then also the quality of the review can be improved. Another topic on the list is to give incentives to reviewers with gamification. So for example, you can collect awards and badges for providing excellent feedback to give some further motivations for the reviewers. All right, to sum up my little presentation, I mean, we're very excited about what's going to happen in the future. We believe that now is the right time to make use of the new technology and to spark innovation. With these words, I'm handing back to Sue.
Thank you very much, Ben and Maël, for your talks. Particularly thanks for explaining how Select Crowd Review potentially reduces bias and increases quality and speed. So we went back out to our author community to find out what they had to say about the experience of Select Crowd Review.
Select crowd reviewing offers a unique opportunity to address the issue of conflicting referee reports. Since referees talk to one another during the refereeing process, the conflicting opinions clash directly, the arguments for one and the other position are exchanged, and ultimately, very often a consensus opinion is reached. Even if not, the exchange of arguments gives the editor a much better basis upon which to base his decision. As a consequence, authors can be treated more fairly through select crowd reviewing than would be the case in a traditional peer reviewing process.
One of the biggest advantages about crowd review is that it incorporates young scientists into the reviewing process. This not only challenges us to think critically about a wide range of work, but it also enables us to take part in scientific discourse with a diverse group of scientists, whether they be more experienced researchers or those from a different field.
We find the process can be quicker than traditional peer review. There is no process whereby a manuscript will arrive with a reviewer who may then not be able to accept peer reviewing that at that point in time, at which you need to find another reviewer and another reviewer. With crowd review, obviously simultaneously it goes to everybody and they can interactively review using the same link. So crowd reviewers are able to see another reviewer's comments, and they can also respond to those comments between themselves. So they may reach consensus, they may agree, they may disagree, and you'll also find that you won't have the same point made multiple times. Instead, a reviewer will say agree on a previous reviewer's comments.
I like crowd review because suggestions and corrections from one reviewer were supported by other some reviewers.
Having young scientists in the crowd is not only beneficial for our development, but it also provides value to the editors and authors, as young scientists are typically more likely to go through small details in the supplementary information. In the end, this makes papers better.
So we will now move to the Q&A part of the web seminar. And I want to introduce my colleagues from TEMA who will be joining the Q&A panel. First of all, Dr. Katrin Ulbrich. She studied chemistry at the University of Regensburg in Germany. She's been working as a scientific editor for TEMA Chemistry's journals for nearly 5 years, and Katrin has lots and lots of hands-on experience of using Select Crowd Review on her portfolio of journals. Welcome, Katrin.
Hi.
And also my colleague, Dr. Peter Henning. Peter has been an editor and project manager in medicine at the TEMA Group since 2018. He has 20 years of experience in medical journals publishing, including 17 years at Schattauer, and Peter's in the position that he's just starting to roll Select Crowd Review out across his journal portfolio.
Hello, nice to join you in the panel.
A reminder again to please use the chat function to ask your questions. Perhaps you'd like to know who's in the crowd for one of our typical journals. Does the novelty of crowd reviewing wear off? Or what is next in the technical roadmap for the product? And if we don't have time to answer your questions today, because we already have a very large number in the chat, we will personally respond to you after the web seminar. So we have a question to start us off, and that's going to go to my colleague, Peter Henning. Peter, could you comment, please, on the ideal size of a crowd for a journal?
So this is indeed an interesting question. And you have to put several aspects into account, and therefore it is not a simple answer to this. At first, you may think the more members you have in your crowd, the better it is. And the more manuscript, the more crowd members you may need. So, for instance, at Synlet, a crowd has around about 100 participants, and we would consider this a large crowd. But on the other hand, if you have designated sections for your journal, like International Journal of Sports Medicine, for instance, you may think about separate crowds for each section. So therefore, it makes sense to keep these crowds smaller, but more specific to a topic. Anyhow, the big advantage is that you can handle this very flexible because there is not a fixed mandatory number for your crowd size. So the more experience you get, the better your feeling is how you put your crowds together.
Thank you, Peter. And a somewhat related question from Josephine Weisflog. She wants to know, how do you recruit reviewers into the crowd? And I'll send that one to Catherine.
Yeah, how do we recruit them? First of all, we choose, of course, people from this area of science. We choose our colleagues. We can ask, for example, for synlab chemists who could join the crowd. We ask younger researchers. We ask experienced professors. And what we also observe, I get a lot of applications from researchers who would like to work as a reviewer.
And somewhat related to that, from Corey Craig, he'd like to know, what is the reviewer incentive for participating? Can reviewers get credit for the work of reviewing since it is anonymous? Catherine, do you have thoughts on that?
Okay, what's the incentive? I think first of all, it's a lot of fun to do a crowd review and to discuss papers together in the scientific community. So I think that's makes it different than normal peer review. Of course, you can get a certificate or something if you would like, to prove that you reviewed certain papers.
But it's the fun and the opportunity, the learning opportunity to interact.
Yeah, especially for the young researchers, I think it's a great opportunity to learn from the more experienced ones and to participate in the in the peer reviewing process, because usually younger researchers might not get so many chances to review papers.
And Maël, I know that there are some gamification plans potentially in the product pipeline, which might also increase the fun aspect. Could you talk a little about that?
Yeah, definitely. Happy to share some thoughts. So we're currently doing user research about that to find out how to build out this gamification system. But the basic idea is to give reviewers some kind of digital awards, so badges or awards, if they give very qualitative feedback on many papers. Like you have it in all these mobile games, like to see it on LinkedIn and all these platforms, to engage reviewers and to keep them motivated.
Thank you. Okay, I have a question for Ben here. It's from Varun Bhatta. He'd like to know, does the first set of reviews set the tone of the review? Do you often see a crowd mentality with the review comments?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and that was also some concern here. So there's two things I'd like to say to this. First of all, really, we had the intention to get a discussion ongoing and then have a consensual decision. It's a little bit different here. And in my experience, what we have seen is that if somebody puts a strong opinion out there very eloquently, yes, they can set the tone, but there's no shyness in also contradicting that statement. So there is always a good discussion ongoing. The other thing I wanted to say is, if you insist on having truly independent peer referees, and some people are of that nature, they want to have separate and independent opinions, you can also, of course, easily install technological things to ensure that. For example, you can have a delay where you wait first for 5 separate opinions and then have everything seen by everybody in the crowd. So there are ways out of this. But we, as I said, we enjoy it as it is, and we don't see really a need for this kind of measure.
I think the crowd can also be moderated by the crowd review editor, who can comment early in the process to make sure that an impartial viewpoint develops. And actually, Ben, I have another question for you. This is from Dominique Singer. Dominique asks, how do you guarantee confidentiality when novel research results are circulated to dozens of probably competing scientists before being published?
Now, that's also a very good question, and a kind of fundamental question. That's always a potential problem in peer reviewing. You know, my wife is a lawyer, and the lawyers always assume bad things are happening. But the truth is that most of our referees are honest people, and they do an honest job. And this kind of behavior has never been seen before, that somebody would steal an idea and then quickly try to publish it. Having said this, there's another, of course, advantage of this. Crowd reviewing is so much faster, and you know, you would only steal from the good manuscripts, obviously, and so the good manuscripts have a very good chance of getting published quickly. And then before you even can set up the experiments or try to submit something else or patent something else, it's already online. So these two elements I wanted to bring to your attention. But of course, in the long run, we have to see how things develop.
Thank you, Ben. Okay, I have a question here for Maël. Maël, could you tell us how the GDPR considerations are managed in Select Crowd Review?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the important part is that all the personal data is stored in Europe, in Frankfurt, and also that all our processes, the way we handle data, are certified with GDPR and also audited by an external auditor. So we're on the safe side here, and it's in terms of data privacy, much safer than just sending emails back and forth.
Thank you. Okay, a question now for my colleague Peter from Mitch Crote. Mitch would like to know, what is the typical response rate from the crowd?
Well, that differs a bit on the paper that has been submitted. You mean how many, I understand this question in terms of how many reviewers will respond, is that true?
Yeah, and how much response you get from those reviewers?
Well, you have a sort of a spectrum of responses. So you get, for instance, responses which are very specific to a certain topic within the manuscript. And you also may get responses that are related to, there's a typo within the manuscript. So you get something like, I think, between 6 to 20 reviewer responses if you have a crowd of around 100. If you have a smaller crowd of, for instance, 30 to 40 or 50 crowd members, you may get responses by 6 or 7 participants. And the amount of responses is probably, as Ben Liss stated earlier, not the most critical thing. It's the question of the quality of responses you receive. And I think in Select Crowd Review, you will get more or less the same spectrum of responses you will get in classical peer reviewing.
And how fast in terms of response rate is it normally?
The response rate, as Ben Liss stated, can be very fast. It can be between 24 hours to 72 hours. You get the responses from the crowd. You also have to see in which area you are working. Keep in mind, if you're dealing, for instance, in medicine, you have not pure scientists. They also are on the upfront of taking care of patients right now in the COVID situation, for instance. And probably think about doing crowd reviewing on something that's completely new, like COVID. Think about the interaction you can handle if you do crowd reviewing instead of single isolated peer reviewing.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I have one from Donna Robelski. Hi, Donna. And this one is going to Katrin. Do we have double-blind review with Select Crowd Review?
So for SynLab, we have a single blind review. But for SynOpen, we also offer the opportunity of double-blind review if the author chooses. And that also works with crowd review, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes, it works absolutely
maybe
fine.
Peter can say more about the medical journals.
Yes, I can add, we do handle this in double-blind peer review too. So the reviewers do not know the authors and the authors do not know the reviewers.
Great. Okay, and here's another one for Katrin, and it's from Anna Rulka. Katrin, how do you create the crowd from the expertise point of view? Do you have 100 reviewers for every subfield or 100 for the whole field?
Yeah, so that really depends on the journal. So for example, SynLab, that's an organic synthesis journal. And there's a big scientific community in the organic synthesis field. So we have one crowd for all the manuscripts. Also SynOpen, it's the same. We have one crowd, and you can send all the manuscripts with one crowd, because they almost all work in they have kind of the same expertise. But with the medical journals, it's a little bit different. So Röntgenforschung and IGSM, they have they have different areas of research, and so you also need different sub-crowds for this.
Thank you, Katrin. Lots and lots of questions here. Here is one for Ben. Ben, has there been comparative testing of select crowd review and normal peer reviewing?
Yeah, in the beginning.
And if so, what were the results?
Yeah, we did the control experiments. I mean, so to say, control experiments. Of course, it's not really a scientific study. In the end, we're dealing with opinions, and so that cannot be really systematically explored. But we did the control experiment, and in the very early phase, we always sent the manuscripts to traditional peer review, as we would have done it in the past, selecting experts in this given area, and send it to the crowd. And the result is that the crowd is usually, of course, much faster. Content-wise, what I have observed is that the opinions and items that are brought up by traditional peer referees are usually also found in the crowd, and typically actually also a little bit more. So it's more comprehensive and faster.
Sounds like a good combination. I have a question here from Maël. It's from Inga Schultzen, and they would like to know, how do you deal with time zones of different reviewers in peer review? Does it have an impact?
I mean, the platform is open 24/7 if you choose to open it 24/7, and then anyone can comment at any time. So you can be online at the same time synchronously, but you can also comment one after the other. So in the morning in Europe, in the afternoon in the US. So that's not a problem. So we're time zone independent, basically.
Okay, that's good to hear. Katrin, could you tell me a bit more about the comprehensive report that comes at the end of the whole process? What sort of information is generated in that?
So when we export the feedback or the review report, we export all the comments as a PDF, and then we will send this to the author. Of course, there's always the possibility to write a summary. What are the most important points? And sometimes we do that, but the whole feedback will be sent to the author.
And who evaluates the final outcome from the crowd review? Katrin.
So we hope that when the crowd review is finished, that there's kind of a consensus within the crowd if this manuscript is publishable or not, or if it needs revisions. But we have a person who manages the crowd review, and this person also can write a summary and give the recommendation to the associate editor.
Yeah, who's the one who will decide ultimately? Of course, that's important to note. It's like not different from other peer reviewing systems. The editor decides. Sometimes people are a bit confused. Like they receive 2 negative reports, and then the editor still decides on publishing it, or the other way around, which is sort of less favorable. But ultimately, it's always the editor who makes the decision, of course.
Absolutely. Another question. And this one to Ben. In how many cases is moderation of communication needed? For example, reviewers replying on each other's comments don't come to a consensus.
Yeah.
How often does moderation need to happen?
Yeah, actually, we were thinking about having a moderator really interfering with the discussion, but I never had to do it. Our crowd editor never had to interfere. One thing, we were a bit worried that maybe somebody would write something rude, or there would be sort of an impolite discussion going on, but that also never, not a single time happened. And people are usually behaving quite well. And as I said, it's not like because there are so many referees, you get, 20 different opinions. Usually, you know, you quickly see kind of a consensual opinion. Also, in the end, as I said, it's the editor who decides. And if there's still remaining issues, then, you know, I just make a decision and opt on what I think is right. But it's a much better informed decision that I can make. That's important to say.
Yes. And somewhat related to that is a question from Marcus Heinemann. He wants to know who actually writes the final report. Is it written by the journal staff or by the actual editor? I don't, Katrin, could you answer that one?
It's not that we write a report. It's we have all the comments and we have the discussions from the reviewers, and this discussion will go to the author, and the author can then reply to the to all the comments the crowd has made. There is really no need to write up all of, like a report or something. I think it's quite clear what the crowd usually wants or what they see in the manuscript that could be changed, and the author can directly reply to that.
Thank you. Okay, a question here from Anthony Sclafani, and this is going to Maël. Does a reviewer receive an alert that another reviewer has commented on his or her original comment?
Yeah, so when setting up the review and file stage, you can enable or disable email notifications for reviewers. So our system knows the email of the reviewers. The reviewers are anonymous among each other, but we know the identity. And if the email notifications are enabled, reviewers will get notified if they have comments added on the files. So they can go back to the platform and add more comments if required.
And another question, this one's going to Ben. Have we considered having a reject button? What will be the cons of that?
A reject button, so the referees can just directly reject? Or, I mean, we have considered a few things along those lines, not just reject, but you know, that you in addition to the comments that you leave, you can also just have a sort of a recommendation, reject or accept, minor revision, major revision. We have not yet implemented this. Maybe this will come in the future. So far, there was no really need for that. We can see what needs to be done. I should also point out that, of course, with the comprehensive results of the crowd feedback, we also make general statements. Please make sure to follow this or that suggestions. And of course, we do not expect our authors to comprehensively address each and every point that is made if it's, for example, excessive. So yeah, we're reasonable people here.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, I think we've got time for one final question before we wrap up, and I'll address this question to my colleague, Katrin Olbrich. Katrin, can you comment on whether you feel Select Crowd Review encourages diversity, please?
Yes, I would say so. So what we try to do at SynLab, and what Ben already mentioned, is that we include researchers with different academic backgrounds, like young researchers, postdocs, assistant professors, but also very experienced professors, and that gives opportunities to the younger generation of scientists to participate in the reviewing process and also to learn. It's a great learning experience. And if you have a sound scientific background in this area, you can apply to be a member of the crowd. It does not matter which country you come from, male, female. And once you're in the crowd, everyone will be invited equally, and you can comment anonymously. So I think, yeah, it definitely does give more people the opportunity to participate in the reviewing process.
Great, thank you very much, Katrin. Okay, so I will share my screen for the wrap up. I'm afraid that we are very nearly out of time, but further information will follow after the event today, including a recording, a survey, and additional information about Select crowd review. If you'd like to continue the conversation, please do get in touch via email or visit the webpage. This email here is selectcrowdreview@filestage.io, or you can visit www.tima.de/SCR. Thanks again for being very, very interactive and dynamic in the chat. And as I said earlier, we'll try to get back to as many people as possible if we didn't answer your question during the actual webinar. All that remains is for me to thank everyone who's participated today, especially our audience, and I want to give special thanks to our speakers. I'd like to thank Professor Ben List and Maël Frize for their talks and for giving so generously of their time. We really appreciate that. It's great to see so many people on the web seminar are eager to join one of our crowds. Just to say at the end of the whole seminar, a survey will be sent out, and in there, there'll be an opportunity to volunteer to join the crowd at one of our journals. But here is another question. This one is from Nicola Nugent, and it's for Ben List. What feedback have you had from reviewers, and does it take them less time than a standard peer review? On average, how many reviews and how many comments are received per manuscript?
Yeah, good question. So the workload question, of course, comes up. If every single manuscript has to be seen by 50 to 100 referees, how can you scale this to a reasonable amount of manuscripts, which we all handle, right? The trick is crowd intelligence. So nobody has to write, like in the traditional way, a full refereeing report where he has to go from page 1 to page 200 of the supporting information and find every little detail and make a general comment. But it's actually a crowd intelligence. Like, many ants can build a big, ant castle. Our crowd referees, they all contribute to the overall refereeing part. Sometimes they only write one sentence. Sometimes they write a little bit more. Also, if you are too busy or you're not qualified or you're not interested in a specific manuscript, you don't have to comment at all. While there may be 50 manuscripts that have access to the, 50 referees that have access to the manuscript, in fact, only a handful or so needs to comment. And I think overall, and that's for me the measure, overall the output of the crowd reviewing format is similar to that what you get from traditional peer review. Maybe it's a little bit more in terms of if you count words, or I like to count substantive comments, big ones or small ones. I think it is maybe a little bit more, but not massively more. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Ben. Another question here, and this is for my colleague Katrin. How do you avoid conflict of interest between the authors and the reviewers?
Yeah, so usually we think that the whole process is self-regulating. So if someone is maybe a friend of someone has a too positive opinion on a manuscript, someone will disagree or something. But of course, if the author of the manuscript is also a member of the crowd, we can remove them before the crowd reviewing process starts. So if there's a conflict of interest, we can always intervene.
Thank you, Katrin. Here's another question that I will send to Peter. Peter, do you think it should be mandatory for people participating in the process to have undergone a formal course, a training for 1 or 2 hours on how to review before they get involved? Oh, Peter, you're muted.
Excuse me, Sue. This is another interesting question. I think this is not a question just to be addressed to crowd review, to select crowd review. This can also be addressed to peer review. And universities and journal editors should think about teaching how to review as well as teaching how to write a good scientific paper. But nevertheless, it's something you can think about to start with. And the big advantage of a select crowd is that you have experienced reviewers and you have young, upcoming, high qualified scientists. So these can learn by looking at the reviews and the comments from the experienced reviewers how to review. So it's a self-training system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Okay, I've got a question here for Ben. Ben, are there criteria that makes a journal a good candidate for select crowd review? What's the perfect journal for the process?
I don't know. It's a new format. How can I tell? I mean, the thing is, what I have to say, what was convenient for us at Synlet is we have one topic, and it's chemical synthesis and catalysis. So we all speak the same language, and typically we can understand the content of a manuscript, and so our referees. I would say that if you have a journal that is a little bit more interdisciplinary, you probably need to have subcrowds of the different areas. Let's say in medicine, there's a subcrowd for the heart, another subcrowd for the brain, or I don't know how this is organized in medicine. But in chemistry, we have organic chemistry, we have inorganic chemistry, physical chemistry, and so on. And you should have subcrowds, and then sort of have an index for your referees with keywords, and then you can even automatically create a subcrowd.
Yes, and the system scales very well for creation of those subcrowds. I've got one here for you, Katrin, that I think you can answer given your long experience of using Select Crowd Review. A question from Sylvia Imberti. She says, I'm wondering if the system favours minor comments, typos and so on, rather than the more general and substantial ones on the manuscript. Can you comment on the kind of feedback you get during the Select Crowd Review process?
Okay. Yeah, we see both types of comments, and I think that's actually a good thing, because you have the general comments on the manuscripts, but also just the small things. And sometimes we have reviewers only looking at the NMR spectra, and we usually don't see that much in traditional peer review. So I think it's a great addition to the more general comments.
Thank you. This is one for Maël. Maël, can you explain what's seen at the end of the process? What will be seen in the final decision letter to the authors? Do they see the whole reviewers' chat discussion, or do they see a summary? What exactly do they get when the review process is finished?
Yeah, I mean, basically the editors also have some flexibility here, so you can export all the comments and forward all the comments to the authors. But if you want, you can also do some editorial decision before and filter. So it depends on what the practice is. I think Katrin can also tell you on how they do it at Thieme.
Okay, so we usually send all the comments. We export it as a PDF, and then we send all the comments to the author. And we have this person called Crowd Review Editor who is managing the crowd review process, and this person also gives a short summary with a recommendation to point out the most important aspects that were raised during the review process.
Thank you, Katrin. Here is one for Ben, and it's about the experience of being an editor on a crowd review journal. Does the workload for the editor increase or diminish, taking into account the huge number of comments, some of which may be contradictory? What's your experience?
I would say, to give a short answer, I would say the workload is pretty much the same, because you have effects that increase the workload because you get, a larger number of feedback, I would say, or maybe more comments. But you also have this beautiful side effect, and that is if there's sort of a biasing or a wrong comment, like what was said before in the video, you have two opposing comments, then usually this is sort of solved in the discussion of the crowd. It's kind of a consensual decision. It's not like there are 50 different opinions, but the discussion is ongoing. And when I look at it, I already can get a pretty clear picture of how my decision should be. So, so overall, I would say it's, pretty much the same work.
Okay, but perhaps a different experience.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, Ben, here's another one for you, but it's a good question. Is there a danger of the crowd becoming an elite or exclusive club and inadvertently excluding sectors of the community?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean,
yes.
There's, first of all, our crowd is not like an elite club, but it's a very amorphous body, and there are people like coming in, and then somehow maybe they lose interest after a while, and then they just retire, and then we get new people coming in, fresh people coming in, and it's a very alive system. Also, each manuscript will be commented on by a different subsection of the crowd. It's not always the same people that are reviewing this. Concerning the diversity aspect that was hinted at, we make sure that we have people from all countries, from all genders, and from all nationalities, and whatever there is. They have to be, of course, experienced. They have to know how to publish a paper, as shown by the curriculum vitae in good journals, and they have to be in, respected laboratories. But that's the only criterion we have.
Okay, thank you. Here's one for Peter. Peter, as you've just started out using crowd review on your journals, can you comment on the workload of getting registered for a crowd member? How much work is involved once they start and join the process of being a crowd reviewer?
At first of all, we are getting more and more attendees who would like to be part of our select crowd in RÖFO and in IGSM. And we do have prepared a small briefing how to use the system, to use FileStage, but there is not a big obstacle to become a member of the crowd. You just apply for it, and the select crowd review editor is discussing who will become member of the crowd together with the editor-in-chief.
Okay. And Katrin, from your experience of using the crowd review method for a long time on your journals, do you find that it's the same reviewers responding again and again in the crowd, or do you find that all members of your crowd engage well when a paper is sent for review? And that's from Michael Willis.
Okay, so what we observe is that not always the same people comment on each manuscript. This changes, and of course there are more active reviewers than others, and over the time some reviewers who were very active might lose interest and stop commenting. Some people never comment, but that's also something we have to address. And we have to we look at people which people are not commenting, and then we remove them from the crowd after some time. We get new members who are very motivated. So this is the crowd. It's changing all the time, and who is commenting, how much. It's very it's changing.
So how frequently do you review the crowd for the journal?
I mean, that's like a constant process. Yeah.
And who is in the crowd for one of our typical journals?
So I can only speak for SynLab or SynOpen. So who is in the crowd? I would say it's very diverse in the if you look at the academic backgrounds of the reviewers. So we have a very so we have young researchers, postdocs, assistant professors, but we also have very experienced professors. And I think that's great, because also the young researchers get a chance to review papers, and usually they're not included that much in the review process. But I think that's great, and also Ben said that that it's a great learning experience for the young researchers. And in SynLab we also have people from industry. That's maybe not so the case for the medical journals, but SynLab, and we also have very international crowd. Yeah.
Okay, lots and lots of questions here about the crowd and who's in the crowd. Ben, in your opinion, is there a risk of crowdthink with select crowd review?
Yeah, that's also a very good question. Crowdthink in the sense that you have discussions leader, I guess that's what you mean. Like somebody puts a strong opinion out in good, uses great words, and then everybody just follows this opinion. I guess that's sort of what is suggested here. So I would say this is not what we see, because we see people eloquently writing something negative about the manuscript, and then somebody else comes and explains why he thinks it's a good manuscript. So there is no shyness in expressing opinions here. It's anonymous after all also. I think what was the other aspect of the, crowdthink. And also I have to say, this is another aspect what what we kind of want that a consensual decision is being made, because actually it takes away a little bit of work for the editor, because they already discuss the manuscript freely and openly, and after a while it becomes silent, and a sort of shared opinion is formed, and this is a good thing, I would argue. However, if you are really insisting on having independent referees, like people who are not influenced, at least when they make the first comment, by anybody else, and some people have that opinion, then I'm sure you can invent technical solutions to this. And for example, you wait until you have 5 comments, and then everything becomes public to everybody in the crowd. This is one way to deal with this problem of crowd think.
Mm. Okay, thank you. This is a question then from Maël. Maël, you mentioned gamification as an upcoming development for Select Crowd Review. Can you expand a bit on that, about what might be planned in terms of product development?
Yeah, I mean, we're still in the user research stage, so we don't have a clear plan, but what we see, what could bring value to this whole process, is to incentivize reviewers for kind of good behavior, good feedback. So if someone gives very qualitative feedback, is engaged very often. I mean, you see it in all these kind of mobile apps, games. You get some kind of badges, awards. I mean, you cannot buy anything from that. It's like reputation that you gain in the community. And this works really well in other areas of business. And this is something we're thinking about, to incentivize and to get the crowd motivated, basically.
So you could be a star Select Crowd Reviewer.
Exactly, and if you have 3 stars, then you're a superstar in the crowd.
Wonderful. Okay, so I have a question from Martin Lacher for Ben. Martin wants to know, editorial board members who have been on the board for many years are now substituted by the crowd. They may become unhappy. This may cause turbulence in the community. What's your experience here?
Yeah, I was just writing in the comment in the chat function to this, and I have not yet received complaints actually. So far so good. It might come up, but so far I have never had any negative email from a previous crowd member or so. Often if somebody is just losing interest, there's no big problem about it. But what we want people in the crowd who are interested in this job and are interested in commenting on manuscript. And if they're not, and they're just there to look at the manuscripts, sorry, then we forcefully, or not forcefully, but we initiate a forced retirement, so to say.
I mean, I do know that the editors on our journals in chemistry really love Select Crowd Review, very positive, real advocates for it. So that's not been our experience that it's caused any turbulence or problem in the community. So many questions here. What shall I ask next? What about the novelty of crowd reviewing wearing off? Do we find that engagement levels drop over time? That one to Katrin, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think I have answered it kind of. So yeah, some people they stop commenting a lot or at all, and then we remove them from the crowd, and we get new members, motivated members. So we make sure that the motivation level is always high enough.